Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Seskinore Rural Community Group, it gives me great pleasure on welcoming everybody here tonight. Conservation and wildlife are topics that are never far away from our media and press at the minute. We're constantly being told what we should be doing or how we should be acting towards nature and promoting nature. A lot of this advice we're giving is theory. It's not really proven practice. Here in Seskinore, we're very lucky. We have one of the finest examples of a wildlife resort or a wildlife garden just a few miles down the road from us, which has been lovingly put together by Sir Bob Salisbury and Lady Rosemary Salisbury. Oh, it is. They've worked tirelessly this last 20 years on rejuvenating a piece of basically waste bogland, which you'll see later on. They've done what everyone plans on doing when you enter into a project. We all think, oh, we must take photographs and record this journey. And I know if anybody's like me, that you remember to do that when the journey's over. But Bob and Rosemary have been very diligent. They've documented their whole journey through. And quite a few of us have had the privilege of walking around their garden and enjoying the wildlife and the ponds, etc. So I know this tonight is going to be a very interesting and educational talk. So without any more ado, I'm going to hand over to Sir Bob and Rosemary Salisbury.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
We're not going to have a formal lecture at all tonight. This is going to be a story. And I think, and we both think, it's an optimistic story. And we hope by the end of this evening you'll leave with a little bit more of a spring in your step and maybe a few good ideas. But before we go any further, I think we've got to get rid of the Sir and Lady bit. That was awarded in 25 years ago for services to education, so it's absolutely nothing to do with conservation and wildlife, and we don't take it very seriously. It's given us a few laughs at times, and some of you may know I've written children's books and get invited into primary schools to talk about how you write a story. And I was in one in Newry, and this little lad, he was about 7 years old, he had his hand up, and I said, yes, and he said, my teacher says, you've met the Queen. I said, yes. And she made you kneel on a stool. I said, yes. And then she hit you on the back with a sword. I said, yes. He said, that's what I want to ask you about. I said, what? He said, do you get to keep the sword? I said, no, she puts it back in a handbag. Keeps it in the kitchen, I think. But Rosie had something very similar, titled The Ladies. Yeah, something similar to that.
Who you're talking about, have you mentioned it? As someone once told me, a very angry parent once told me I was no lady. But after I finished at Drumrow, I was asked by the Westminster government to go and sort out a few schools in England. And one of those I arrived at was in, the really salubrious areas. The first one was Bradford, the next one was Hull, the next one was Doncaster. And then I ended up in the East Riding and Goole. And if you know those places, they're interesting. But when I was in Hull, the task involved amalgamating two schools, and one of them had 1,200 students, and that's the one I started in. And I always made a rule of, on my first, as soon as I got to the school, I would stand at the door, stand outside the door to watch the young people leaving the school. It tells you a lot about a school, how they exit. and I had my name badge on, which said Mrs. Salisbury, which is the secretary had given me. And so I'm watching all these youngsters walking through and see how they're relating to one another and so on. And these two little ones who just started, it was September, they just started the school, came rushing up to me. And the little girl, followed by her sidekick, who I later learned was called Ian. And she says, "Hey miss, is your name Lady?" And I said, "Who told you that?" She said, "My tutor." A tutor is form teacher here. And I said, "Oh, don't worry about it. My badge says Mrs. Salisbury, that's grand. How did you get on today? Did you have a good time?" "Yeah, we're great." And she started telling me about her day. Meanwhile, Ian's standing there. First year in here, 1,200 kids surging through the gate, totally mesmerised. And eventually he looked at me and he said, "Lady? That's nice. My dog's called Lady." That's why I've loved the privilege of working with young people all my life. They never let you get above yourself.
So, Bob and Rosie are fine. We need first to say some background information. We came in 2001 and it was initially going to be a short visit. Rosemary had gone quickly up the ranks in teaching in England and was head of a prestigious secondary school. But right out of the blue, a letter arrived from one of our old teachers here in Oma, a much respected teacher. She said that the integrated college was going nowhere fairly quickly and it needed somebody of her time to give the kick up the backside. So she said to me, "Do you fancy living in Northern Ireland for a while?" And at that stage I was a professor in the School of Education in Nottingham University, but running a national scheme for training school leaders. So it didn't matter where I was based. One day it'd be Birmingham, the next day London, whatever. So I said, "Yeah, we'll have a go." We put our cottage up for sale just to test the market. It was on the edge of Sherwood Forest, Robin Hood country, a 200-year-old cottage, and it sold more or less immediately. So then we were homeless. And we looked at houses all over Tyrone and Fermanagh, and they were either too far from the airport or too far from the school, or they didn't suit us. And then one day an estate agent said, "Land is fairly cheap at the moment for building on. Building materials are relatively cheap. You know, you could get your own, and planning's very straightforward," he said. "You could get your own site and build exactly what you wanted." And at that stage, fate really intervened because 5 acres came up about 1.5 miles from here. It was land that was once owned by Rosemary's father. He was killed when she was 18 months old on a tractor accident, and it had been rented out ever since, really. It was 5 acres of what you call fairly rough pasture, I suppose. And we liked somebody had done a lot of damage to the trees with clumsy digger work, but we did like the lie of
I've been warned not to tell you who that was.
Yeah. We did like the lie of the land and that view of Seskinore Forest in the background. What I didn't know, though, as an Englishman, was how wetland can get in Ireland in the winter. We got hold of the land in the summer, and it looked like good land to me, but the winter was a shock. There were parts of it that you could barely get through with, you couldn't get through with a vehicle, and you could barely get through it with Wellingtons. But it was, that's a map of it, a dry hillside in the middle, a small dry field, and then wet bits at either side. We did like the fact that the Drumconnelly Road was high up, and the wind came from the west there, but most of our plot was in a very sheltered bit of land. But it's while I was sitting there one day thinking where we're going to put a house that Rosemary said, "Do you notice something odd?"
It wasn't you.
I'm going to get this all night. I'm going to get used to this.
It's Hugh's fault. He told me we had to be funny.
I've been getting this for 47 years now.
I thought I was just here for a bit of glamour, but I have to work apparently. No, when as a child, and you know, there might have been rose-coloured specs, but I had remembered lapwings, partridge, corncrakes, all sorts of interesting birds, lots of butterflies. And coming home from school, we spent the entire spring examining and keeping track of the hedges, the nests in the hedges. And there was nothing, there wasn't a sound, a couple of old, as you call them, crows flying over. So, and of course we lived on the edge of Sherwood Forest, which was alive with birds and wildlife. So I said, "Do you notice anything odd?" And I probably got a smart answer, but it didn't mean anything. And I said, "There isn't a sound of anything alive." So at that point, and you know, sometimes you say things and you look back and think, what on earth made me say that? But I did say, "Shall we try and see if we can turn back the clock and attract some wildlife back here?" And thus the journey began.
We actually did some research straight away once Rosemary told me that 30 years ago it was alive with birds and butterflies and so on. And this was 20 years ago. When I looked, I thought Ireland had missed what was already happening on the east side of England, where the agriculture is very intense. But I was quite surprised to find that Northern Ireland had lost quite a lot of wildflower meadows and so on in the 30 years Rosie had been in England. Sorry, I pressed the wrong one. Okay. And what I did was go around to some of the older farmers and just ask them what had happened in the 30 years since she'd been away. Was there any reason for it in our patch? And what you have here is a summary of what one of them, a very respected farmer, told me. And we were chatting for 2.5 hours, I think, and what he said was, it was a policy of moving from mixed farmland to grassland, and having single species in the grasslands, no wildflowers, a single species, increased chemical and slurry and speedy cutting of grasslands, and a rise in the number of animals per year. The same meeting, the same gentleman said to me, "We're going to have problems with runoff into the rivers and into the lakes." And Loch Ness this last few months has vindicated exactly what he said. You've earned the right, Jim, to say I told you. I was going to tell you the Jim story, but
They've all heard it, everybody's heard it.
would you like to hear the Jim Riddle story? I'll tell you anyway. When we first got there, I was on the lane at the top, just trimming a hedge, and I didn't know anybody then, and this man stopped in a Land Rover, and he leaned out the Land Rover and he said to me, "Am I right for Jimmy Riddle?" And I said, "Sorry?" He said, "Am I all right for Jimmy Riddle?" Now I know about rhyming slang, you know, a whistle and a flute is a suit, apples and pears is a stairs, Reuben Murray's a curry, and I definitely knew what a Jimmy Riddle was. So I said to him, "You want a Jimmy Riddle? Help yourself." He gave me a strange look and drove off. And I went down to Rosie and said, "You know, there's some odd folks here." So she said, "Why?" I said, "Well, there's a chap just asked me if he could take a tiddle on the hedge." "What exactly did he say?" I said, is he all right for Jimmy Riddle? She said, Jim Riddle is our neighbour 2 farms down. There was a postscript to that story, actually, the Riddle House in Belfast on the Malone Road. It's an old Victorian, huge Victorian house, and they've spent millions on doing it up into a conference centre. And the director invited me to talk about education to the CBI, and to wake them all up. I told them the Jimmy Riddle story, and she phoned me 3 days later and said, I've got a bone to pick with you. And I said, what? She said, well, we spend millions changing the image of Riddle House. I said, yes. She said, I rang round all the directors to tell them where the next meeting is, and without exception, they all said, is it being held in the Jimmy? Okay, but as Rosie was just saying, things have gone. When did you last see a skylark or a curlew or lapwings, barn owls? All those birds have had a massive decline. Kestrels, particularly, over the last 3 years, have plummeted, and in the south of Ireland, the numbers of kestrels around, they've just disappeared. Even when we came to this site, there were kestrels around, but I haven't seen one for 5 years or so. There's no mice or no voles in the fields anymore. There they are. And, so on. And I was making the point at a meeting that the last 2 years, we actually see fewer and fewer insects on the country lanes. I said, when I'm driving along the country lanes, you used to always get insects splattered on your windscreen, and it's not happening anymore. And Roy, who's here, said straight away, there's no insects on your windscreen, Bob, you're not driving fast enough. But he did concede that there are fewer insects than there used to be. Okay. And it was Rosemary who said, could we turn the clock back 30 years? We didn't know what we were going to do on that side, but could we do something with it? The problem was we had really little knowledge of biodiversity between us. We had no knowledge of garden design. We had little spare cash because we had to build a house, but we did have this dream.
That occasionally turned into a nightmare. But yeah, generally just a dream.
So,
we were willing.
Somebody said, I think it was a friend of Rosemary's, take photographs from day one, because when you get demotivated by it, you can look back and see that something's happened. So she bought me a semi-professional camera, and that's been an interesting aside to this whole project, in that neither of us believe in retirement in the sense of retirement. We always think it's an opportunity to do something different. So it's been great to learn about photography, wildlife and all the rest of it while we're doing the project. Though she bought me this camera, complicated piece of equipment, and we've been down to Donegal one day with the dogs, and we're a bit late coming back. So I said, we'll call for some fish and chips. And we went into a fish and chip shop. You know how you order your fish and chips and then sit down to wait. The local press photographer came in. Admittedly, I'd only met him a couple of times at the school, and only briefly. And when he sat down next to me, I said, you're just the man I need to see. He said, why? I said, well, I've just got a new camera, but it's complicated. I was just hoping that he'd give me a tip or two. And he said, I'm not into digital photography. I said, no. So I changed tack. I said, I've just bought a new program for the computer as well that lets you edit the photos. I'm not into computers. So I got the fish and chips and walked out, and I was still muttering when I got into the car. Rosie said, what are you chuntering at? I said, the press photographer in there. He's not into digital photography and he's not into computers. He's done lucky to keep his job. She said, do "You know why he's not into computers and digital?" I said, "No, because he's McGonagall, the cobbler." When I met the real Pat Maxley a few times later, he said, "Come into my studio anytime, Bob." And he's been very helpful at getting us through it all.
And his name's Pat McSorley. An Englishman for some reason can't say McSorley.
There's a lot of words I can't say yet. Now is one. No English person can ever say the word now. Before we go any further, I mean, you get experts coming here, and I just want to assure you of my credibility to be standing here speaking. And I'll illustrate that with a little story. I bought a crabapple tree to put in the meadow because crabapples are good for wildlife. And I got the book open and I pruned it according to the book. And it was brilliant. I was really proud of it and pleased with it. I used to look at it every day. I'm making progress here as a gardener and a wildlife expert. And when it was in there 4 years, Rosie said, "When will it ever have some crabapples on?" I said, "Well, according to the book, it's this year. It should fruit this year." And it did, with Victoria plums. So that's the sort of expert you've got now. Okay. We put down what you need in a wildlife garden first, and you need all those things if you want to try and attract every sort of wildlife. So wetland, woodland, meadows, some formal gardens, food and shelter, and if you can, no pesticides. And that's exactly the same thing that you need in a small garden. You know, it's just the same rule whether you've got a tiny small garden or a few acres of garden. If you can get a pond of some sort in it, it will attract wildlife. Even if you can only get one tree, it attracts all sorts of insects and birds and so on. If you can leave a bit of grass a bit too long in one corner rather than mowing it all that will help. But you need that range of things if you're going to try to build something. So what we did, somebody said to us, make a plan and stick to it, because it might take you a year or two to keep going. And that's what we did. We knew the outcome. We wanted to attract wildlife. We checked the microclimates. That's the difference between the drier bits, the wet bits, where the frost pockets are, where the wind is, where the sun hits in the morning and the evening, and so on. And it was, even in 5 acres, quite markedly different from one bit to the other. On the top of the ridge, where the westerly winds were coming in from Donegal, a few weeks ago, you remember, there was some very strong winds coming in. When you got to that top ridge, you could barely stand up. It was sort of buffeting you like that. When you came down into the valley, behind the trees in the shelter, you could be wearing your Speedos.
That'd be a sight to behold.
I think I'll change that image.
I think you should.
when the wind,
it's not a good image.
when the wind comes from that, you could stand up on it. In the sheltered bit, you could be reading a newspaper. That's a better image. Okay, a scale plan. We drew a scale plan to see what we put in it. The style has to be a country garden if it's in the country, doesn't it? Nothing looks dafter than a town garden stuck in the middle of the countryside. It should blend into the sort of scenery that you've got around you.
What's your idea of a town garden then?
Well, there's one not too far from here where they've got Greek patios and Japanese bridges and statues all over the place. It looks more like a garden centre than a garden. It has to reflect the sort of area that you're in, I think.
He's lived in Tangeray too long. I was trying to say to him, each to their own. Tyrone.
We had no idea how he designed this, so we chopped it all up into bits, designed a bit at a time, stuck it on a big sheet of paper, and then drew the pathways round so you could get round easily. The house, we looked at dozens of houses, but settled in the end for an old traditional parochial style Irish house with stone cornice and slate roof.
Bob, I think Bob fancies himself sometimes as the parish priest.
That'll be the day. Okay, so we kicked off on March 2003, and we had to get lorry loads of stones even to get into the site, to come in. And I'll flick quickly through this because we've got the luxury of jumping 20 years in one jump since we took photographs. So whereas there's a lot of work in between this, we tonight can jump forward. So that's the first jump. That's the view today. Same place, exactly the same view.
The dogs are a bit younger.
Yeah.
If anybody's interested in dog minding over a period of a couple of weeks, you can borrow the house. Those dogs won't go in a kennel, in an official kennel house place.
It's hard to, you'll see dogs in the pictures all the time because they're posers really. You were going to say something about the name of the house, Rosie.
Oh yes, the Fod. As he mentioned, I was in Drumrah while he spent most of his time up at the site. And our sons, we have 3 sons, and one of them would ring and say, "Where's Pa?" They call us Ma and Pa. I think they must have watched the Waltons or something when they were young. They call us Ma and Pa. And they would ring and say, "Where's Pa?" And I said, "Oh, he's up at the site." And that gradually became, "Where's Pa? He's up in his field of dreams." So that got shortened as Pa at the Fod. So when we moved into the house, we thought, goodness knows why, we would give it a nice Irish name. And we thought we had to ask people because neither of us speaks a word of Irish. So we were asking people for nice Irish names, and none of it just seemed pretentious for us to be trying to find an Irish name. So our daughter-in-law had just applied to Trinity to do a doctorate, and we'd helped her with the interview. And this little thank you gift arrived in the post, plaque that said the Fod, so that's why it became the Fod. But then a native Irish speaker came, and he said Fod means grassland, sod of land or turf. So we pretend now we knew what we were doing all along.
It's an old Irish word for turf or grassland, so it fits. Okay. That's just inside.
Our very own dark hedges.
We're trying to think of the Game of Thrones entrance, to get it like that. That's winter, and of course in summer it's very green, like a green tunnel. Okay, and that's more of the original thing, and that's just changing it. But you can see water running down the sides of both sides of that when we first dug it, and that just reminds me that whenever we've gone to ask for help from people or advice, people have given it very readily. They understand instantly what we're trying to do, and I don't think most people like what's happening to the countryside and have been got fully behind it. I remember going down to a wholesale tree guy at the Moy, Jim and Andrew Donnelly, because I wanted some advice on a wildlife hedge there. What would you put in? And he said, "I like your idea." He drew a plan up for me straight away, put honeysuckle in, dog roses, holly, all of that. And he drew it on a piece of paper, the planting, And before I went, he said, oh, and these 6 Austrian pines, I'll throw those in for nothing because I like what you're doing. And you can have the whole lot for just over cost price, which was really good to see that, you know, he was getting instantly behind him. I've not looked at that photo for a long time, and it's funny how a photo just reminds you that time's passed, but it reminds you of things that have happened. That dog was an old, very well-trained Labrador we brought with us from England, called Sal. And one day, Rosie's A-level geography teacher he was sick, I think, and the students were getting a bit behind with their studies, so she asked me to take a group up to the Sperrins to do some river studies. And I took them up, I thought I'd take Sal, so she walked to heel, and when we got to the river I said, sit there, and she just sat down watching what was going on. And everybody was working away, writing notes and stuff, except one chap, one young student, and he was just standing, staring at me. And I was just going over to see why he wasn't getting involved. When there was a shout from the river, they were dropping a float in the river, a red float, and you time it going down the river, then somebody else catches it at the other end to work out the volume of water and the flow of water. And this shout was because somebody had missed the float and it was heading off to the main river. And that would have ended the lesson. So I said to Sal, hey, go fetch it. And she was in straight away, soon overtook the float, and she took it in her mouth, came back gently, plodded up the bank, put it in my hand. And I said, you're getting on in years, but you've still got it. And this chap walked up to me and he said, can I ask you something, sir? I said, thank goodness he's got into it finally. I said, yeah, of course. He said, how much will you take for that dog? One fundamental truth in teaching is the difference between what you think you're teaching and what is being learned are 2 entirely different things. Once at the back of a classroom doing an appraisal of a science teacher, it was boring, unbelievably boring. And at the end of it, I said to the 16-year-old girl sitting next to me, I have to write one key learning objective before I leave this lesson. I said, so what's the key thing you've learned? And she turned to me, she was quite a glamorous girl, she said, one thing I've learned. I said, yeah, what's the key thing? She said, if ever I get married, I'll never let a man of mine go out wearing a tie like he's wearing. A gulf between teaching and learning. So that's the same lane. So you can see how it's filled in, and okay. And he also said, while you're planting hedges, plant the formal hedges round your house before you've even built it. He said, because by the time your house is up there, you'll have a structure in the garden that you can work with. And
But
that's Rosie and
those are the real labourers in the vineyard.
Yeah.
We were doing the stuff. That's a double planted hedge all the way along.
Yeah.
So we were just stopping for a well-earned break. That's our middle son, Eddie.
But it looks a bit barren there, doesn't it? That's the same view now with the cherry trees and the hedges.
Just a lovely green all summer, and then goes that beautiful rustic colour in autumn.
But I think digging the lakes that we wanted to attract the wildlife was the time when I think we had the most misgivings about it all, because it turned wet and the clay was sticky and it was blue clay and it just did look awful. It looked like a First World War battlefield. And I remember the two of us standing there thinking, is this just a pipe dream? You know, will we ever get this sorted out? Because it looks so bad.
Well, at that stage it was quickly becoming a bit of a nightmare. It just looked so, you just thought we're never going to turn this into anything worthwhile.
You can just about see the white line we painted on that middle island. That's the depth of the water. But we need to worry because, you know, nature applauds the optimist, and it's amazing how quickly that changed. Within 2-3 years, it had greened over, and it looked like it's been there for forever. Everything came of its own accord. We didn't do any planting there, it just happened. And I think the digger had disturbed stuff that was already in the ground. But it has a special charm in winter, I think, and like that charm. And then I'll go quickly through these because you can see how over years it's developing and changing. So it's exactly the same view as you look. Big change, isn't it? So that's the view up towards the lake, towards the lane. And you can see that middle hedge that was badly damaged, that's filling in. Gradually the vegetation is catching it, sorry. Like that. And that's a shed I asked the builder, who's a very good builder, to build, but I asked him, can you build it old style so it looks like it's always been there? It's a mow-up shed and tool shed. And he didn't like doing it because he's a precise builder. I said, look, I need it to look like it's 100 years old. I want the plaster to be wavy and looks like a shed that's always been there. And he finally did it, and that's the outcome. But when we were standing there, he said, what you need now, Bob, is a donkey looking out of the top of that thing. And I very nearly got one. I get my paper sometimes from the little shop in Seskinore in the middle. And when you go in there on a Sunday morning, I get the local news, and I have to say it's usually quite gloomy. Who's died, who's got a bad diagnosis, who's had a crash, and goes on. And this particular morning, I went in, and Joe, who sells the papers, said to me, Bob, you'll never guess what's happened now. And he looked really distraught. I said, what's happened, Joe? He said, last night, somebody set fire to the donkey's arse. And I said, what? Set fire to the donkey? Was it killed? Whose donkey was it? And he said, no, not a real donkey, the plastic donkey that was in the middle of the village. And somebody put a plastic donkey, a big life-size plastic donkey with a cart. And it was a pretty naff looking thing. It was a bit, I never liked the look of it. So I thought one wasn't going to mourn its passing. But I said to him, where is it now? He said, the council have taken it away. And I said, where are they taking it to? The Burns unit. Some fell on stony ground. And he said, no, they've taken it to the council tip. And I said, well, they'll soon get it patched up, it'll be back soon. He said, no, it's done for. It'll never come again. Somehow it had metamorphosed from a plastic donkey into a real one. But as when I was driving home, I thought, that donkey's just what I need for my shed. I could have its head sticking out. It would be cheap to keep. You wouldn't need to muck it out, and it wouldn't worry me if it was only half the donkey it was. So I phoned the council. I said to this woman, she said, I said, I'm trying to locate a donkey with a plastic donkey with a burnt backside that the council brought into the tip. I want it for my garden. She said, sorry? I said, I'm trying to find a plastic donkey with a burnt backside that the council took to the tip. She said, you want a plastic donkey with a burnt backside for your garden? She said, are you English? And I said, yes. And she put the phone down. A few weeks later, a white van man, he was driving on, and somebody put the donkey looking out over a hedge, and his mate was reading The Sun, and he said, He said, hey, there's that donkey my neighbour wants, the one with the burnt backside. And this chap said, your neighbour wants a donkey with a burnt arse for his, a plastic donkey for his garden. He must be one sad boy. So, we're still in the market for donkey characters.
No, we're not.
Anyway, okay. So, another 12 acres came on for sale on our boundary, and we now have a plan of working. So that middle line is the old 5 acres, and then we have a 12 acre one, which had a 3 acre wildwood on it. And we didn't want any more, work, so we put it in a new planting. Okay. And by this time we've got the measure of how to do it quickly. We built a bigger new lake and planted with a grant 4,500 trees. And what we've learned over the 20 years, and I think this is really the important bit that you need a varied wildlife habitat if you want to attract everything. You need, we have some thoughts on garden design and so on stems. But the wetland, this is the newer land, is really matured nicely and it looks like the lakes are there forever. You do need, if you can get a stream running in to keep the water fresh if you're building a bigger pond. I think we're the only people in Tyrone who want more rain sometimes because it cleans the whole system through. And the wildlife came. Once we got the habitat right, and we were so excited the first time we saw 4 frogs spawning in our new lake. I took a photograph of it because I thought this is great, they're finding us. And you know the old adage that say if you build it they will come, that's right if there's any in the area. If there's none in the area like skylarks, then how can they come? So that was the first year, very excited. That was the next year. The frogs have multiplied, and if you see now in the spawning system, there are thousands of them, and they sound like a moped. And of course, you set the food chain going then. The buzzards arrive because the buzzards eat the frogs. Sometimes you have 6 buzzards standing like that, watching the frogs. The collective name for buzzards is awake. It seemed like it. They're just sort of hanging their heads ready. It's a poor picture of a buzzard, so my friend that Rosie had just mentioned sent us a proper picture. Do you want to say a word or two about John while you're passing?
I'm not sure it's relevant, but John is, they were neighbours of ours when we lived in Nottinghamshire, and he was a pig farmer, and he didn't enjoy it very much, and he came to us one day and said, I wonder if you could give me some advice. I think I'd like to become a photographer. And we were surprised with 2 young kids and a obviously very understanding wife. So anyway, he did become a photographer, and of course his background in farming was one of the things that contributed to his brilliance as a photographer, and he wins worldwide competitions. He has publications all over the world, calendars, all sorts of things. So that's John. You really wanted to know that, didn't you?
I only mentioned that because he sent me this and said, I hope it's good enough for you. It's a brilliant picture. Okay. And the newts turned up. I haven't seen newts for years, but somewhere they were hiding under stones. And then we feed the one end of from September onwards, we feed the wild duck. They come in, really readily. I stood the other one, I actually sat, we've got a bird watching thing, sat in there the other night to see. There's something magical that you think we really have got something here. When you sit there at dusk, the light fades and the duck come in. Our record to date has been 33 mallard in one evening and 10 of the smaller teal duck. And it's a wildlife spectacular when you think, well, there were none there before. There's something lovely about sitting on a quiet night. The dogs hear them first, their heads will turn and look up in the air way before we hear things. Then it's a whoosh like a train coming down when they come in. Brilliant, brilliant. And of course the otters followed the frogs. We didn't know there were likelihood of any otters around, and we see them regularly now in the lakes. One year they actually bred, which is amazing. And I was at the little hut taking some pictures one day, and the otter came to look at me. And that's a picture I like, when there's a frozen lake and the otter was just walking along the top. But also the herons arrived, the frogs, and I think perhaps that picture is not a brilliant picture. It's taken with a trail camera, but it perhaps summarises for me more than anything else what habitat can do. Because one day when I was down there without a camera, the heron caught an eel. And the eel was about that big, and it wrestled it a bit before it swallowed it. An eel from a pond that wasn't there at all. And then another day I saw the eel drop something, and it was a river lamprey, which is like an eel but with a sideways face on it. Where on earth have they been? Where have they come from? Why are they in a lake that wasn't a lake at all? You know, it's quite reassuring that. You need woodland. I went to see Jim Whiteside. He's another one who's supported us and said, what sort of trees shall we put in? And if you're thinking of a wildlife garden, the figures in brackets are the insects that live on particular species. So you can see at a glance there, the oak, if you've only got room for one tree, an oak has more insects on it than any other. So you know, there's a room there. Things like rowan, though, have great berries on them. So, you know, you intentionally make your choice. Another dog in the old wood.
Our little grandson Arthur, when he was a little boy, he's now very old, he's 7, nearly 8. And he used to love walking in that wood, and he used to say, Grandma, we're in the deep dark wood, but there's no buffaloes.
You were going to mention ivy as well.
Oh, yeah. Yes, ivy. Ivy's on a par with bamboo in my book. I just, when I see ivy on a tree, I think that's a death sentence for the tree. But the wildlife people totally disagree. They say and it's true, a lot of insects and birds and wildlife do find refuge in there. The foresters say, cut it off, cut it down, and I would be on their side. And so we reached a compromise. We took it off some of them and left it on others. One day when he's not around, I'll dock the rest.
This is a rather going on.
Yeah, bamboo. If you take nothing else away from tonight, don't ever plant bamboo. It's a triffid. John Wyndham would have had a field day if he'd come to our garden. It's you can walk along today and it's there. You go back the next day and it's here. It just is so invasive. Don't plant it.
It's my fault. We planted.
Of course.
It should have been plump
Would you like to say it?
forming bamboo rather than the spreading sort. So it's a nice plant in winter. It's got a nice rustle to it, but make sure you get the clump forming sort. Okay. You can see we cut a ride with the mower so you can walk right round the garden without getting too wet. What's happened to that? Have I pressed something? Yeah. We underpinned the planting with bluebells. bulbs are expensive, but if you just scatter seeds, after 3 years the bluebells will be there. So just pick the seeds off them, dry them, throw them around, and they'll soon...
And those were all from Brian Duncan?
Yeah, Brian Duncan, you probably know him, is the internationally known daffodil man. These are the 4,500 trees. We planted them very closely on their advice, knowing that we were going to take every 2 trees out a few years down the line. And we're doing that already. We also planted daffodils underneath, and the purists of wildlife gardens say you shouldn't do that. We still like the daffodils, they're a sign of spring, and I love it when they first come up. But the straight, pure wildlife conservationists say they're an alien plant and you shouldn't. I think they're wrong.
Call them daffodils.
Yeah, Chris Packerby always calls them daffodils, but he's wrong. And that's ash dieback, which you all know about now. When the ash trees start to get that colour on the top, like a browny goldy colour, then they're on the way out. In our case, all of them that have caught it have died. So the younger planting trees, they've caught it and gone. And even one of the big ash trees got it and died. And the tree surgeon said to me there, if you get it in a big tree, get it cut down before the tree gets rotten. If it's rotten, it gets very dangerous to take it down. They call them widowmakers trees. You know, you've got to take it down before it's too dead. Okay. And you know, pathways. This is a new little field.
And you'll notice there are lots of benches all over the garden, because in my view, you know, apart from all the technical stuff Bob's talking about, it is, and those who have visited I think would probably agree, it's very largely in the whole aim of it is to be a place of tranquility and peace. So obviously benches or seats of some sort are very important in my view. It reminds me of the poet W.H.D. who's a Welshman, but we won't hold that against him. He's dead anyway. What is this life if full of care? We have no time to stand and stare, no time to stand beneath the boughs and stare as long as sheep and cows. And his last 2 lines, I won't go through the rest of it. A poor life this, if full of care, we have no time to stand and stare. We can sit and stare as well, of course, but it is important, and that's what this garden's about. It's just a pity we never have enough time to do it ourselves. But one day.
Sorry, I pressed it in a bit. The pine martins came last year, by the way. So we've got the first pine martins there. And grassland, I'll go fairly quickly through this. We tried to get a south of England grassland by buying seeds, and it didn't look natural. In the end, we just settled for an Irish meadow. That's knapweed, meadowsweet, buttercups, and so on. And once we got that sorted, the mice and the moths came back and the butterflies. We put some buddleia around the edge. Butterfly bush, it's a Chinese plant, but the wildlife don't know that. The butterflies love it. So again, the purists say you shouldn't put buddleia in a wildlife garden. They're wrong, I think. And of course, once you've got the mice in the grass, then the barn owls turned up. We haven't seen one for the last 2 years, but they are around. Okay, and that's the meadow when it's starting to die back in the autumn. You do have to cut it. So to get the wildflowers coming back, you need to cut it. Okay. I only put that slide in because every tree there was in a skip. They'd outgrown their pots, and the chap just said, take them all, Bob, if you want to try them in your garden, you can. And for the first few years, they looked a bit seedy, but look at them now. So they were all safe. And in terms of grassland, they always say you should have, let the grass grow, but we can't stand it looking out of the window. We've got plenty of long grass around the place, but we do need still to cut the lawns.
And that little bench is in memory of Ian Whiteside, who used to do our hedges. Very special fellow.
And every morning, when wildlife folks say you shouldn't cut the grass, every morning those lawns are covered in rabbits, hares, pheasants, water hens. They all seem to come out onto the shorter grass.
The water hens get braver by the minute. They're now nearly on the top lawn. Is there another one of the grass on the lawns? You can see it's tiered, it's terraced. And one of my greatest achievements is that I taught all my grandchildren to roll down the hill. And like any good teacher, I led by example. It was great.
I went to check her insurance. So Irish hares turned up, pheasants of course. We've got a piece of bogland at the back of us. I thought, well, we'll put in this slide up. Seskinore is in a brilliant area for creating a whole wildlife area here. We've got forests, we've got a lovely river with floodplains, we've got an extensive area of wild bogland which has always been underrated, but we had it surveyed the other day out of interest. There's all sorts of rare plants on the thing. It should be preserved. And when you think of a small area like Seskinore, we've got virtually everything here to create a whole area of interest. Thankfully, the snipe shooters no longer go on it, and I think that was nice to see, because bringing parties in from Belgium and Holland to shoot snipe, they're not allowed to shoot in Belgium and Holland. Seems crazy to me.
Seems crazy to me that somebody can make money of something that they didn't invest in. And they've decimated, and this year the number of snipe up there has quadrupled because they've been banned.
It's the best form of carbon capture, isn't it? So it's well worth it.
And that's Murph.
Yeah, okay. So formal habitat, we got that totally wrong. We thought it had to be nettles and brambles and all that, but it's not. Some of our formal garden has been very attractive to wildlife.
That's not as cultivated as perhaps it ought to be, but that's because it is alive with ants, biting ants, and they made sure that I'm allergic to their stings. So it looks a bit neglected because it is. This is the only time of year I can go near it.
Outside the kitchen window. But I put these two slides in for a smile, because that's a tulip tree, and a gardener said to me, "You're going to have trouble with that, Bob, in 40 years' time." I said, "I don't think so." And that's got a stilt hedge or a pleached hedge, and you keep trimming it off at the bottom, and as it matures, you've got a hedge that's sort of floating in the air, so you have it on pillars. And I was just thinking, it's just beginning to turn into a good pleached hedge. And the gardener said to me, "You can cure that, Bob, if you plant it under it with other beech trees." Can't weeds and that. Pheasant feeders.
We've stopped using those because we had invasions of rooks. I didn't fancy buying seed to feed the rooks. So
A lot of people...
we just feed them at the doorstep now.
The rash estate on the edge of Omagh, as you go out on the Derry Road, it had the biggest rook colony in the whole of the UK, with 10,000 breeding pairs on it. So it's a huge colony. It still is, but not quite that size. Okay. And just a shot of the garden. And the flower pots and so on. Speed a little bit. Put that Cotoneaster in because it's got berries on. 2 weeks later it had none. So that's another thing about wildlife gardening. Once the redwings, the thrushes, the blackbirds, the nizzle thrush come, then the strip of berries. Okay, house martins under the eaves.
Wonderful. As long as you don't mind cleaning the windows every day.
Everybody can have
right over the street.
However big the garden, a bird feeding station will work. And one of the positives in wildlife garden has been how many birds have come back to urban gardens. The sale of bird seed's gone up and it's benefited birds. That's a collared dove. That's a sparrowhawk who feeds on the collared doves. That was a strange pheasant that turned up one day, I don't know where that was from. And a family of long-tailed tits, and a really rare one, the greater spotted woodpeckers. They've come back to Ireland in the last few years, and they're now breeding well in Seskinore forest, and they're also in our patch. Okay, and very quickly through this, garden design, we looked at Capability Brown, famous landscape gardener, and he said, try and build it as if nature has made it. So in 20 years' time, when you look at it, you should be able to say, well, this is a brilliant scene, it's been put there by nature, but it hasn't. So all these scenes are created, but they should look natural. So there's Izzy's bridge and the little run into the...
Izzy's our eldest granddaughter.
Trying to make it look as if it's always been there, but of course it hasn't. That's the...
Our eldest son Matt made the bench. He's very proud of it.
But it's one of the sheltered places and a great place to just sit down. And we've seen kingfishers coming along there, which is...
Every time I go there, I think if I were 20 years younger, because I trained as a CBT therapist when I finally retired, I would turn the entire place into a well-being centre. So that is peace for some. That was lovely.
That's Brian's bridge. He built it when we were in London to jump over the ditch. But scenes that look like natural, they are, of course. And then Capability Brown said if you're designing a formal garden, keep it formal at this end and get less and less formal as you go further away, and then borrow the landscape. That hill where Alison's horses are on is not outfield, of course, but it just blends into it. So run the eye down either side and just blend it into the countryside. That's what I meant about town gardens and countryside gardens. It should just blend naturally into it. Okay. And make it interesting. Okay. Even turn the drive so you can't see what's round the corner. There's a curiosity there. And that's Monet's bridge. We had to build a bridge the first time we opened the garden to gardeners because the stepping stones there, and we had a feeling that some people not used to it might slip on the boulders and fall into the rocks. And we hate to see that happening. So I said to the chap who helped us, Brian, I'd love to build a copy of Monet's bridge south of Paris, but we can't do that because it's got a curve on it. And he said, have you got a picture of it? I said, yes. And he was back 3 days later. He said, are you free tomorrow, Bob, to put the bridge up? So it was brilliant. That's the daffodil walk up there in spring. It's got dozens of daffodils up that side. Okay, same shot in winter. And I love that shot because that's rambling rector, that rose. It was developed in Newry and it's gone all over the world. It's a very perfumed rose, a very vigorous rose. But I only put that shot up because there's one day a very elegant lady was standing there and she was looking at it and she said, I love this rose. And I said, so do I. She said, I've got one in my garden. She said it's got wonderful perfume and it's vigorous. I said, yeah. She said, one thing puzzles me though, its name. I said, I was thinking, Rambling Rector, why is that a problem? She said, why did they call it Randy Rector? I said, I don't know, but you can see it gets them out of it. Who was it you said sat up and having a cup of tea on that?
Oh, Barney Stars?
Yeah.
Yeah, Barney came one day with my brother Kevin, and he said to Bob, how did you know to put this patio here? And Bob said, oh, well, it just seemed a place, it catches the sun a lot throughout the day. And he said, well, we used to grow, dig potatoes or grow potatoes on that top field. And he said, we always came here to have our tea because it was a nice sunny spot.
Exactly that spot, which is nice.
Somebody told one of the guys who was delivering blocks or bricks or something one day, and he said, I hear it's a lord that lives here. He says, what's that? He says, that's his helicopter pad.
Okay. And so a few odds and ends. Putting all the trees in has increased the wood visions around, which is interesting to see. And of course the rabbits.
The rabbits are a mixed blessing. I had some very nice, well, smartly arranged pots full of lovely shrubs. It cost me an arm and a leg. Came up down there. I couldn't believe it. They were gone. They were shredded. So living with nature can have its trials, but it's, you know, I forgave them because they loved it.
We are seeing a lot more stones on the ground as well with the rabbits. You use a funny word, don't you, for it?
Wittred. Does anybody know that word? Yeah. Wittred.
Wittering on stone.
It's like asking to say shuck.
When I first came and the digger man said, I'll put some boulders down the side of the shuck pond. Are you happy with that? I said, I would be if I knew what a shuck was. I thought it was some sort of German pickup truck. We had to wire in all the veg patch once the rabbits came. We both like cooking, and we both like growing vegetables. And that came with us from England because the farmer at the side of us grew broccoli for the market. And one day he was spraying it because he got a few bugs on it or something. And the next day he was cutting it for the market. And I said to him, is it not dangerous to spray it and then cut it for the market? Makes no difference, he said. I said, why? He said, because it's systemic spray. It soaks into the broccoli. I said, does that mean you can't wash it out? He said, no. I said, do you eat your own broccoli? He said, no. So we started growing our own. We're at the end of the food chain, aren't we?
There are blackcurrants on the other side of that fence, and when we asked Jim Donnelly how many we need, he said, oh, half a dozen. And Bob said, give me a dozen then. He says, well, do you need all those? And he said, well, we can share them with the birds. And that's exactly what happens. There's enough for all of us.
That's the same plot in the summer, you know, with things going on. Oh, why do I keep doing that? Oh. Sorry, I've just pressed the wrong button. What have I done, John?
It's time to go.
We're nearly at the end anyway, folks.
You've gone past your hour. That's why. Is there anything anybody wanted to ask? Please don't ask me. I know nothing about gardening. But ask.
I'll be very
ask.
good. You know what?
While it's warming up again.
We're really very
Grace words. You have any problem with grace words?
No, we've only two squirrels. I've only ever seen two squirrels. And I don't know, the pine martins have had those or not.
The dogs are not too keen on them either. I think they scared them off.
One thing that we didn't do very well was the orchard. It was too wet and too exposed. But Bramley apples grow well on it. And Bramleys, as you know, are very good for cooking, so it's okay. I'll try and press the right button now.
No, I wish.
We've only seen 2 since we've been there. Yeah.
Yeah, really, because I love a hedgehog. Or 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yes. Yeah, we'll leave 3 compost heaps. So we keep an eye out.
Okay, that's the new field full of berries and things, that one. And I put this little fella up because it's a spotted flycatcher. They've died out nearly all over the place, yet we've still got them in there. So it shows that if the habitat's right, then they'll still keep going. To date, we've registered 66 species of birds and 14 mammals. So, you know, that's pretty good going. And amazingly, we won the Sustainable Environmental Project for the whole of Ireland, which is something we had no idea about doing when we started out. And a couple of years ago, we won the Gold Award in Parliament for environmental sustainability. Though Rosie and I would be
Needless to say, Rishi didn't present it to. Sorry. Rishi Sunak.
We definitely trade those awards though for a few skylarks and a few curlews. And Rosie mentioned the corncrakes. Wouldn't it be something to hear a corncrake again around here? I mean, that would be worth all the effort.
Bob reckons I imagined it. Does anybody, nobody's as old as me here, are they? So, does anybody else, was I imagining it? Jim? Did I imagine that there were corncrakes, or were there? Really? Corncrakes?
What?
I haven't heard corncrake in the ears. But he said here.
But he did, yes.
I didn't hear
Anyway, I'll keep going. We're at the end of it, folks. You've been very, very patient. But we can all make a difference, and it has surprises, just what's come back. But I just want to finish with a warning from history, really. You know, in the 1850s in the USA, there were, on the mid-western states, there were millions of birds called passenger pigeons, a bit like wood pigeons. And they never could tell how many there were. There could have been billions, but what they did know was when they were migrating south, the sky went black with them for days on end. And they started to shoot them, net them, put them in cans, sell the meat off, destroy the trees that they bred in. And in 50-odd years, from the 1850s, in about 50 years, the last one died in Cincinnati Zoo in 1912, I think. In 50 years, they'd killed off millions of passenger pigeons and made them extinct. And modern day Americans just ask the question, did they not see that coming? You know, how on earth could they let that happen? But the same thing is happening now in the British Isles. The decline of farmland birds has been massive in the last few years. In Northern Ireland, 17 species of farmland birds, their population has halved since 1996, and the decline is still happening. In fact, it's accelerating. And you know, our final message is that the wildlife on these islands is, we have it in trust for those who come after us. It's not ours to get rid of just as we see fit. We have to think about our children and our grandchildren. And if in 40 years' time there's no farmland birds left, Rosie and I would hate the thought that our grandchildren's children were asking the same questions. Did they not see it happening? You know, why didn't they wake up to what was happening? It would be a very tough question for us to answer, wouldn't it? So, it's been a pleasure meeting you all. Thank you very much for coming along. I hope you've got a few ideas from this, and I hope that
They're not going to plant bamboo.
Okay.
It has been a privilege to have these two people tonight. I think their forte or the beginning of their careers was in education, so it's easy seeing them educated as tonight. Sometimes Bob says, did people not see it happening? I think the biggest problem is that we have to wake up and want to see what is happening, because it's very easy to see things that's happening but ignore them. But we need to, we do need to realise what is happening and see what's happening and just take wee tiny steps to prevent it. As I say, we've been really privileged tonight to have Bob and Rosemary. Sure, Bob and Lady Rosemary. We'll give them their finest titles for the last time tonight, perhaps. I'd just like to call on Hugh McAleer to say a few words of thanks, and there's maybe a wee gift or something to present.
Thank you, Robert. At the risk of a bit of duplication, I was enthralled by the presentation tonight. I did ask them to make it entertaining as they could, and add a bit of humour, and they certainly done that. So I suppose summing it up, it was educational, it was entertaining, it was enjoyable. For me, ladies and gentlemen, it was inspirational. So put your hands together and get involved. And Lila, if you're at hand, would you come up here and present a small token of our appreciation to Rosemary and Bob on our behalf, please?
I think the boss had better have this one.
Just a couple of pieces of housekeeping before we wrap up. I suppose the first thing I would like to say is just to thank our cameraman, Declan Grimes, at the back of the hall. We decided this time that we would actually video and record the event, and I'm really, really glad that we did, because I want to see it. I want to see my family to see it, and it will all being well be on our website where everybody can see it and can share the inspiring talk that we've just witnessed. I suppose you should, any of you are interested, there's a book called The Field of Dreams written by Bob for sale at the back of the hall afterwards. You're more than welcome to purchase this. It will make a great Christmas gift for everyone. Just one or two small things that's happening outside. Some of you may have noticed some work going on at the waste area opposite the Church of Ireland on the road to Oma. There's a wooden fence being erected there and double gates. And I think it's only right that I should take this opportunity and thank Kieran Cassidy from Forest Service, who has, I suppose, looked after that project. The fence was erected last week and the gates, they've been increased today, and during this week that whole waste area is going to be scraped out and stoned. I suppose it'll prevent it from being continuing to be used as a dump. It'll be available for the Church of Ireland for car parking as and when it's required. And I think it'll just help the area generally. So, first of all, my thanks to Kieran Cassidy of Forest Service, and also my thanks to Leila Russell, who has liaised with Kieran on the project. Sufficient to say, when I got involved at the start, Kieran was giving us a steel barrier. By the time Leila was finished, she's got 2 lovely ranch fenced double gates. So, a round of applause for Leila. There are a few other small projects in the pipeline in the area, and I won't go into any details, but I suppose just watch this space. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance and your attention. There's a cup of tea or coffee and some refreshments available at the back of the hall afterwards. So, thank you.